Makes Me Wanna Holler by Nathan McCall, Chapter 39, The Past. Often, during those years after prison, it seemed I was spending the second half of my life trying to straighten out all the mistakes made in the first. Every time I thought I'd overcome my past and gotten over the hump, something would come creeping up from nowhere and put shit in the game. Sometime in 1987, a call came in from a woman at the Washington Post. They had an opening in one of their Maryland bureau offices and wondered if I would be interested in applying. That was a hell of an honor. The Washington Post is the major leagues. Practically every journalist, black or white, wants to work his way up to the Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. I took the offer as an indication that in covering City Hall, I'd gained some valuable experiences that just might serve me well. Since I'd begun covering local politics, I received similar calls from other newspapers, and I'd actually interviewed at a few. I sent the materials the Post wanted, my resume, my best news clips, and they scheduled a date for me to fly to D.C. I knew that the Post had recently promoted a black to be assistant managing editor in charge of their Metro section. That made me feel more comfortable about interviewing there. Still, there was something about the prospect of interviewing at the Post that concerned me. The same thing that popped up anytime I considered the job anywhere. It was the 3-year gap on my resume. People usually wanted to know what I had done from 1975 until 1978. I wasn't inclined to tell them I spent those years studying at Penitentiary State University. Nor did I feel comfortable making up bogus jobs to fill in the gap. Weeks before the interview, I agonized over whether to tell the paper about my prison past. I knew the Post did more thorough background checks than most other newspapers. They'd begun doing that after 1981, when it was discovered that a reporter who had written a Pulitzer Prize-winning series about a young heroin addict had made up the story. The reporter, Janet Cook, was black. The Post management learned later that in addition to lying about the story, Cook had also lied about the college she'd attended. I was certain the Post would do background checks to avoid further embarrassments. My intuition told me, tell the truth and be at peace. But, recalling the painful experience in Louisville, where I thought I landed the job until I fessed up about my prison past, I wrestled with the issue and then decided to seek outside advice. I talked with an editor friend who suggested I tell the truth. Then I talked with an older cousin who reiterated something I'd been taught all my life. Never be truthful to whites. Don't tell them shit, he said. That settled it. I'd have told any details about prison and see what happened. The interview was far more involved than any other that I'd experienced. I talked with several people over the course of about 2 days. I met the legendary Ben Bradley, the raspy voice editor, and other bigwigs I heard and read so much about. A few of the people asked about the 3-year gap. I told them I dropped out of college and spent that time trying to find myself. I thought, yeah, white people can relate to trying to find yourself. No one else on earth spends more time trying to find themselves than white people. They all nodded, indicating they understood. But the reaction of Milton Coleman, the black assistant managing editor, was different. When I told him I spent the 3 years trying to find myself, he asked, "What did you do at that time?" His eyes bored right through me. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I worked in the library and spent the time reading and thinking about what to do with my life. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. We got through that conversation, but I sensed Milton wasn't fully satisfied. He didn't say it, but something in his manner suggested he wanted to know more. Following that interview, I was happy to learn I wouldn't be asked to fill out a job application. That surely would have contained the standard question, have you ever been convicted of a felony? I hadn't decided how to respond and was glad I wasn't forced to make an on-the-spot judgment call. I returned to my hotel room exhausted, but confident that the interview had gone well. Before leaving, I got subtle indications from a few people, but to whom I talked that they felt I was a strong candidate for the job. I went back to Atlanta and waited. Several weeks later, I was sitting at my desk, working late, when my telephone rang. I lifted the receiver. Nathan, it's Milton Coleman. The minute I heard his voice, I knew I was busted. It was the same intuitive knowing I felt that night at the McDonald's. The alarms went off in my head. I braced for the blow. We exchanged greetings and small talk, then he launched into his purpose for calling. Nathan, there's something I need to talk with you about. Someone at your former paper in Norfolk told us that you've been to prison. Can you tell me why you didn't tell us about that? I wanted to ignore the question and run away. Just dropped the receiver and haul ass. A whole host of regrets flooded my mind. I regretted ignoring my intuition. I regretted staying at work late. I regretted having gone on the interview in the first damn place. Why did I let these people complicate my life? I had a secure job and a buried past before they called. I had to go and get ambitious. Now I gotta cop another guilty plea. In another life, I would have copped out completely. Even after learning they had the goods on me, I would have gotten mad and given the world the middle finger. Fuck it, man. I don't want to talk about it and you can't make me. But this new life held me to different standards. So I took a deep breath and prepared to face the firing squad. I explained to Milton why I hadn't told him about my past. I told him what happened several years earlier at the job interview in Louisville. You may not believe this, but I agonized over it a lot before coming to Washington. I half expected him to cut me short and end the conversation, but he listened. He listened to the full explanation, then said, I understand. He said he would explain it to the other people involved in the decision-making process. I have to tell you that some of them are against you because they feel you lied to them. I'll get back to you and let you know the outcome. I sat there at my desk for a long time thinking of the implication of what had just gone down. I felt I'd let myself down in the worst way and let down all the black people who would ever interview at the Post. Janet Cook lied. Nathan McCall lied. They would check the teeth and fingerprints of every black who came through the door. Damn. And running from the past, I ran right into it. I was choked up inside. When I felt myself about to break, I got up, walked calmly to the men's room, went into a stall, and wept like a baby. After several minutes, I collected myself, wiped my eyes, and gave myself a good talking to. You've been through too much to have to go through this again. Don't take yourself through it, man. Put an end to it. I returned to my desk and called Milton Coleman. When he came to the phone, I said, Milton, I've thought about our conversation, and I'd like you to remove my name from consideration for the job. I don't want to go through this. After a brief silence, Milton said, I understand. I figured that he, at least, understood hardship. He had been in the news a lot during the 1984 presidential campaign because he had contributed information to a colleague's story revealing that in private conversations, Jesse Jackson had referred to Jews as Hymies and to New York as Hymietown. Louis Farrakhan, who supported Jackson's campaign, added to the controversy by implying in a speech that Milton should be killed for betraying black people. Those had been tough times for Milton. Later in our conversation, Milton revealed that he understood my feelings on a deeper level. I have a brother who got into trouble with the law once, and I know what he's been through. I said, then you do understand. Yeah, I have them take your name out of the hat. There was a pause. Then Milton said, look, man, I don't want you to be discouraged by this experience. It's got to be rough for you, I know. But sometimes we grow from experiences such as this. I promise you that I'll keep an eye on your work and we'll keep you in mind. Who knows? Maybe in a few years when all this blows over, we may want to reconsider you. It meant the world to me to talk with somebody on his professional level who understood. It struck me that few black people in this country come from families where no one has been to prison. To some degree, we all understand. Before hanging up, Milton offered a piece of advice I have never forgotten. He said, "At some point, you're going to have to realize that although you have been to prison, you have since built a track record in the work world. You don't have to spend the rest of your life hiding past mistakes. You can now trust your track record, tell the truth, and put the past behind you." I said, "Thanks, man. I'll think about that." After we hung up, I went back to the restroom and cried some more. One day, during an argument, I told Debbie that I was so displeased with the lack of stimulation in our relationship that if I didn't see some improvement soon, I planned to file for divorce. I also told her that I planned to go to Miami to visit my homeboy Cooter without her. Against her wishes, I left for Miami and she packed up the kids and met her relatives in Wilmington. When I returned a few days later, Debbie met me at the door and handed me a thick wad of papers. She had filed for divorce, alleging mental cruelty, and all that other standard bullshit they include in such papers. That action started a long and painful process that led us to court in early 1988. As my marriage broke down, it was different at the newspaper. Under Kovac, I found myself wanting to explore new opportunities opening up. I made it known to my bosses that I was interested in becoming an editor. That would be another plus on my resume and would broaden my options down the road if I wanted to dash to another newspaper. Besides, I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to enter the world of white management and see if it was as esoteric as they tried to make it seem. I applied to go to a popular fellowship program called the Multicultural Management Program, which was run by a black journalist, Ben Johnson. Held at the Journalism School of the University of Missouri, the month-long program was designed for reporters and management types on all levels to sensitize some to issues relating to minorities and to prepare others to deal with racism in the workplace. I left for the program in the fall of 1988, at a time when I needed a diversion from my domestic troubles. When I arrived on campus, I met the group, which was a motley crew of about 20 people, blacks, Hispanics, Asian, whites, and even some Native Americans. We were escorted to rooms in the wing of the graduate student dormitory. Some fellows complained about the cramped rooms, but I felt right at home. My dorm room reminded me of a prison cell. We started the program with a seminar, the first of many we would have every day until we left. The group leader, a tall, slender white man with a genuine smile, led off by asking us to talk about ourselves. People were guarded. We held back those parts of ourselves reserved for only those we trust. It remained that way through the first week. Then, one Friday evening, after the grueling schedule had begun to take its toll, we all went back to the dorms. Someone suggested, "Hey, let's get some beer." I had a boombox and some cassette tapes. We went to a room, milled about, talked, and listened to music. One by one, others drifted in. Then we started dancing. Black, white, Asian, everybody started throwing down. And before long, the affair grew into a full-blown party. We laughed, sang, got drunk, and took pictures as the racial barriers came down. It was as if all at once we realized that it really didn't matter what color we were. We were all human beings brought together by a common experience. Aside from the time I spent with Danny, I never experienced anything like it. I think that party and the closeness that evolved among us was a new experience for the others too. During that month, we learned about each other's cultures and shared feelings about the rest of the world. The two Native Americans talked a lot about the impact of racism on their people. They told about the despair, the high alcoholism, and suicide rates diminishing their once thriving tribes. One of the Native Americans, a woman, broke down in tears while telling the group about their struggle. "You have no idea how frustrating it is as journalists trying to educate whites in the newsroom who are ignorant and arrogant at the same time," she said. An Asian American's eyes also watered as he recounted his troubles trying to make it in the white work world. Listening to them, I realized how self-centered I had been as a black man. I had come to think of the word minority as being synonymous with black. Even when campaigning for the hiring of more minorities in the newsroom, I had been concerned solely for blacks. But through those sessions, I learned that Asian Americans and other minorities were as essential as anyone to changing the media. Often, during those weeks, outside speakers came in to take part in seminars and panel discussions. In one of the seminars, managers from several of the nation's newspapers were brought in to talk about the difficulties they face in trying to hire minorities. One of the speakers, a guy from the Washington Post named Tom Lipman, led into his presentation by saying, "I want to tell you two stories that I think will give you some indication of how difficult it is to achieve what it is we're talking about here. The first one is the story of a young man who we were interested in hiring about a year ago. By all accounts, he was very good at his job. He works for a serious newspaper, does very well, has satisfied every demand placed upon him by his editors. He was quite likable. He happens to be black, and we were getting ready to offer him a job. I can tell you, though, that because of our own experiences with a certain minority journalist whom I don't need to name, my newspaper is much more careful than it ever was in the past about checking references on people and finding out exactly what their backgrounds are." Before he went on, I braced myself. I knew he was talking about me. I felt it inside. I knew it was my past haunting me again. Littman continued, "In this case, we discovered on a reference check that this young man has served time on a felony conviction." Blood rushed to my head so quickly that it made me dizzy. I sat there wondering what to do. My first impulse was to interrupt him and let him and everybody in the room know that he was talking about me. But I knew that if I stood and tried to speak, I'd lose control and go off on that white man. I shifted in my seat, trying to decide how to handle it. Then, when the question and answer session started, I couldn't resist. Looking at Littman, I said, "I didn't get the point in the example you used about the guy with the felony conviction. How does that reflect upon the problem you have finding minorities in the newsroom?" While he babbled some response that didn't directly answer the question, I decided to keep quiet and see how my colleagues responded to him. As soon as he finished talking, hands shot up in the air. One woman said, "You expect us to believe that the Washington Post cannot find qualified minorities because all of them have prison records?" Another person asked, "What did his prison record have to do with his qualifications for the job in the first place?" One by one, the fellows attacked Littman's logic, and one person even told him, "Such racist thinking is exactly the reason programs such as the one we're attending are needed in the first place." The group's reaction to Littman warmed my heart. They made it clear that their concerns were not about the Post rejecting an applicant for being less than forthcoming, which it had every right to do, but that Littman was wrong in implying that prison records are common among minority applicants. I felt good that they'd come to my rescue without knowing it was me they were defending. When the session ended, I walked over to Littman, who was standing near a wall, looking red-faced, and pulled him off to the side. I said, "You know that guy you mentioned with the prison record?" He looked at me curiously. "Yes." "That was me." His eyes grew as big as two 50-cent pieces. "That was you?" He apologized so loudly and dramatically that he caused a scene. I'm sorry. Gee, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I really am sorry." I told him that there was no need to apologize and that I wanted him to know that the example he cited for being unable to find minorities was inappropriate. He apologized some more and we parted. Later that day, I went to dinner with a group of program fellows and told them I was a job applicant with a prison record who had interviewed at the Post. They were surprised. Then they got mad all over again and launched into a debate about whether the group should complain to the Post. Some wanted to write to the Post to complain about Littman. Others argued that it wouldn't do any good. I told them to let it drop. I didn't want to appear to be crying over spilled milk, but I could tell they all shared my hurt and anger over what had happened. Experiences such as that drew us closer together. That and the time we spent together. We ate breakfast together, spent entire days in the seminars together, then went to dinner together, and often rapped or hung out together until bedtime. After a while, we were like one big rainbow family. When the program ended, I knew that I had taken part in a rare and special human experience that I would cherish for the rest of my life. I sensed that the others felt the same. We had a farewell program on the final day. Each of us got up and went to the front of the room and talked about how deeply the program had affected us. The talk I remember most was given by a white guy from San Antonio. I remember it not so much for what he said as for what he did. Despite strong efforts to hold back, he broke down in tears. I knew why he was crying. Everyone in the room knew. We had learned that the racial differences that we had considered so profound were not so broad after all, and we felt better equipped to go out and preach the gospel of multiculturalism. The Missouri experience strengthened our wavering hope, and that realization brought us tears of joy. Bill Kovac left the Atlanta Journal-Constitution sometime in 1988. He got into a disagreement with one of the bigwigs and quit. You would have thought they would have tried to keep him. Under him, the paper had won a number of Pulitzer Prizes after years of going without winning any, but they readily accepted his resignation. A lot of other people left the paper after that. Kovac's leaving was a clear indication to them that the management of the Journal-Constitution had decided that the strain of being a world-class newspaper was too much for them. The management was much more comfortable with mediocrity. While a lot of people in the newsroom mourned the loss of Kovac, the good old boys who had survived his purges rejoiced. To them, Kovac's departure was a victory of grand proportions. A Yankee had been run out of town. The South had finally won. Before he left, I had an encounter with Bill Kovac I'll always remember. I walked back to the foyer leading to his office and told his secretary I needed to see him. She told me, "Have a seat." Sitting there, I thought about what I was about to do. I've been thinking about it ever since the experience with Tom Littman at the Multicultural Management Program. I had also thought about what Milton Coleman had told me after my interview at the Post, and I concluded that Milton was right. I had built a track record, and it should be strong enough to help me overcome my past. Being upfront about my prison record was the only way I could guard against it haunting me. I decided to tell Kovac. After several minutes, his secretary said, "Go right in." A white-haired man in his 50s, Kovac was a square-jawed cat who had dark shadows circling his eyes. It gave him a raccoonish look. Sitting at his desk, working, he looked up and stopped what he was doing. "What can I do for you, Nathan?" "There's something I need to talk with you about." "Okay." He sat erect. "What is it?" I got right to the point. "I have served time in prison." "Oh, what for?" His tone and expression didn't change. "Armed robbery." I waited for a visible reaction. There was none. Then he gave me a strange look, as if he was wondering why I had bothered wasting his time with such trivia. After a few minutes, he said, "Is that all?" I thought, "Is that all? Is that all?" It was enough to make some white folks run screaming from the room with their arms flailing. I cleared my throat and answered, "Yes." "Is anybody giving you shit about it?" "No." "If anybody gives you shit about it, let me know." That was it. I sat there a minute, waiting to see if he had anything else to say. He said nothing. I looked into his eyes, and he looked into mine. Then I rose and walked out of his office, stunned, wondering if that scene had really occurred. All right, thank you guys for listening. We have made it to the end of another chapter, and we're getting closer to the end. Sun Tzu teaches in The Art of War that all warfare is based on deception. And one of the things that I think Nathan McCall is starting to realize at this point in his life is that the people of the world have a lot more in common than what they have not in common. The enemy to us all is his idea is to divide and conquer. So if I can keep you guys arguing amongst yourselves, men against women, the rich against the poor, black people against white people, it's all an effort to keep us divided and not paying attention to the ones who are really in control, who's making life difficult for all of us. So it's good that Nathan had that experience being around those different races of people and seeing that, wow, we all are going through some similar troubles. This is the kind of thinking that can really bring us together, as a whole. Now, I know with social media and this idea that, well, either you're completely with what I'm doing or you're a hater, that makes that coming together a whole lot more difficult. But all you can do is, worry about making yourself be that open person and keeping an open mind. We see that Nathan is having a much easier time in his life now that he's able to get his mind thinking about some different things. This idea of holding on to mistakes in the past and carrying them with you, into your present and into your future, that's something else that's going to make life difficult for you. Now, that's not to say that you can completely set those things aside. But if you don't learn from those past mistakes, you'll continue to make those same mistakes. So the idea is, once you make a mistake, you need to understand why you made it in the first place. And that's something Nathan has been coming to the realization of. So I always enjoy reading these autobiographies of people because you can look at their life and apply those lessons that they learned to your own life. That saying of know thyself is so important. It doesn't say know thy community or know thy country. By knowing yourself, everything else will fall into place. And you can do that by learning from the actions of others. So you guys let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you click that link to my ebook, Free Your Mind to Have Peace of Mind. And I'll see you guys in the next chapter. Peace.